The galaxy was in chaos. Wars raged across hundreds of star systems. Empires clashed, alien races fought, and innocent lives were lost with each passing day. But then, humans arrived out of tea first. No one believed the humans could make a difference. They came in peace with no weapons, no armies. Just a message: we end wars. The alien civilizations laughed at the idea. How could a single species, with no history of warlike power, possibly end a conflict so vast and destructive? The Terran Federation, known for its peaceful ways, didn't care about the doubts. They had their plan. They had their technology. And they had something more powerful than any weapon. Hope.it all started on the world of Varen, where two great factions, the Drax and the Urath, had fought a brutal war for over a century. The two sides had wiped out entire cities and countless lives. The Drax were a fierce race of warriors, and the Urath, though not as strong, were clever tacticians. Neither would back down. When the humans landed on Varen, no one expected what happened next. The humans didn't demand a ceasefire or threaten to use force. Instead, they requested something simple: a meeting. The leaders of both factions, tired and weary of the endless bloodshed, reluctantly agreed. The humans didn't come with weapons, only with calm faces and clear voices. They spoke of peace, of ending the war without violence. The Drax laughed. "We've been fighting for more than 100 years. You think words can stop this?" The humans smiled. "Words are all we need. You fought for so long, you've forgotten why. We're here to remind you." It seemed impossible. But as the humans spoke, something strange began to happen. The anger and hatred that had fueled the Drax and Urath for so long started to fade. They began to listen. They remembered what their people once stood for before the war began. The humans spoke of family, of love, of what it was like before the fighting had taken everything away. For the first time in years, the Drax and Urath looked at each other without seeing enemies. They began to talk not as soldiers, but as individuals. They remembered what they had lost. Slowly, the human message started to work. But then, something unexpected occurred. A faction of both the Drax and Urath, those who still thrived on war, began to stir. They didn't want peace. They didn't want to be reminded of what they had lost. They wanted the war to continue, believing it was the only way to survive. They made their move, trying to sabotage the peace talks. Tensions soared as both sides turned on each other once again. The humans knew they had to act fast or everything would collapse. They didn't give up. They didn't raise their voices. They simply spoke again calmly, firmly. "We know your pain. We understand your loss. But the future doesn't have to be like the past. The cycle of violence ends here. You have the choice to make. Do you want to keep fighting? Or do you want to rebuild what was lost?" For hours, the room was filled with silence. The Drax and Urath leaders, who had once been bitter enemies, now stood side by side. They thought about the future, about their children, about their people. Could they really go on fighting forever? Could they really erase the possibility of peace? The humans stood quietly, waiting. They didn't push. They didn't demand. They simply offered hope, something the Drax and Urath had forgotten in their endless war. And in that moment, something changed. The leaders turned to each other, unsure but willing. It wasn't a perfect peace, but it was the beginning. The fighting stopped. The humans had done what no one else could. They had ended the war, not with force, but with understanding. The humans left Varen quietly, their mission complete. But the message they had brought of peace, of hope, of seeing the humanity in each other would stay. The galaxy began to see that the Terrans were not like the others. They didn't fight wars. They ended them. Yet, the peace didn't last everywhere. The enemies of peace, those who thrived on destruction, continued to plot. And so, the Terrans knew their work was far from over. They traveled to other systems, spreading the same message: we end wars. But everywhere they went, new challenges awaited. There were always those who believed war was the only way. There were always those who would rather fight than forgive. But the humans didn't give up. They didn't force peace upon anyone. They simply showed the way. And as they left each system, there was one thing that stayed, the spark of hope they had lit in the hearts of others. The galaxy was still at war in places, but the humans had proven something vital. Wars could end. And they didn't have to be fought. As the Terran ships disappeared into the stars, the message spread. Humans don't fight wars. We end them. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy dared to hope. The galaxy was in the middle of a devastating war. The Vorax and the Solari had been fighting for centuries, with no end in sight. Entire planets had been destroyed, billions of lives lost. The war seemed endless. But then, something unexpected happened. Human ships appeared in the skies of the Solari homeworld. The Solari leaders thought it was just another enemy fleet, ready to join the battle. But when the humans made contact, they didn't offer weapons or armies. They offered peace. "We can end your war," the human ambassador said calmly. "We have something that can stop all of this without firing a single shot. A weapon, but not one you know." The Solari, desperate and tired of fighting, agreed to meet with the humans. But they didn't believe the humans could truly end a war that had lasted so long. They expected trickery, something to gain an advantage. What they didn't know was that the humans weren't here to fight at all. When the humans revealed their weapon, the Solari were shocked. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but a strange device, small, quiet, and unassuming. The humans called it the peace engine. It wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to change the way people thought. The peace engine was a complex machine that could influence the minds of the leaders of both sides, showing them the consequences of their actions in real time. It didn't control thoughts or force anyone to act, but it made them feel the weight of their decisions. They saw the families torn apart, the worlds turned to ash, the children who would never grow up. They felt the deep pain of loss. "Use it," the humans said. "Let it show you what this war has cost." The Solari leaders hesitated, unsure if they should trust the humans. What if it was a trick? What if it was a weapon in disguise? But the Vorax were just as tired. The war had drained them too. And so, the peace engine was activated. What happened next was impossible to describe. The leaders of the Solari and the Vorax watched as the device projected images in their minds, images of their own people suffering, dying, and grieving. They saw the faces of children, lost in the chaos, and the faces of their own soldiers, many of whom had no idea why they were fighting anymore. The device didn't make them weak. It made them human. For the first time in years, the leaders understood what their actions had truly caused. The war wasn't just about victory or defeat. It was about the future they were destroying. The Solari and the Vorax generals stared at each other, not as enemies, but as people who had been caught in a trap of their own making. It was not the peace engine that had made them feel this way, but the truth it had revealed to them. They had been blinded by hatred and fear. Now, they saw clearly. But not everyone was ready to accept the truth. A faction within both the Vorax and the Solari saw the peace engine as a threat. They didn't want peace. They had built their power on the war, and they believed it was the only way to survive. They knew if peace came, they would lose everything. And so, they did everything in their power to stop it. They sabotaged the peace engine, sending out false signals and creating chaos. They tried to turn the leaders against each other once more. They didn't care about the cost. They didn't care about the lives lost. All they cared about was power. But the humans had anticipated this. They didn't trust either side entirely. They knew that some would always resist peace. And so, they had made one final backup plan, a secondary version of the peace engine, hidden deep in their ship, waiting for the right moment. As the sabotage unfolded, the humans activated the backup. This time, the peace engine didn't just show the consequences of war, it showed the consequences of ignoring peace. The device projected images of the galaxy after the war was over. Empty cities, broken families, civilizations on the brink of extinction. It showed the future that was possible if the fighting didn't stop. The effect was immediate. Even the hardest hearts began to waver. The leaders of the Solari and Vorax, who had once been on the brink of destroying each other, now saw the truth of their situation. The weapon wasn't just a tool to stop the war, it was a wake-up call. It made them realize that no one could win in this war, not in the long run. But even as they began to soften, the resistance was still strong. There were those who would rather see the galaxy burn than lose their grip on power. The humans made their final offer. You can continue this war, or you can choose peace. The peace engine has shown you what the cost is. The choice is yours. The Solari and Vorex leaders stood together, torn between their past actions and the future they wanted. They knew that peace was the only way forward, but it wasn't an easy choice. For the first time, they understood what was at stake. They had to decide not just for themselves, but for the future of their people. In the end, the leaders made a choice that shocked the galaxy. They chose peace. They chose the future. The humans left, their mission complete. The peace engine had done its job not by forcing anyone to surrender, but by showing them the truth. The war ended, not with a single battle, but with a simple decision. The peace weapon wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of understanding. And it had changed everything. The war between the Zorath and the Mirians had raged for decades. No one could remember when it started or why it had begun, but it didn't matter anymore. The two races had fought so long that peace seemed impossible. Entire planets had been destroyed, and both sides had lost countless lives. The war was a constant, endless cycle of violence and hatred. Then the humans arrived. The Zorath and the Mirians were shocked. Humans had always kept to themselves, staying out of galactic conflicts. But now, ships with the Terran Federation's insignia appeared in the skies above the battlefields, and a message was broadcast across the galaxy. We don't fight wars. We end them. The two sides laughed. What could humans possibly know about war? They had no great fleets or powerful armies. They were not like the Zorath, with their endless weapons, nor like the Mirians, known for their clever strategies. The humans were just another peaceful race. But that's exactly what made them dangerous. The message was clear. They were not here to fight. They were here to stop the war. The humans didn't demand anything. They didn't threaten to destroy or conquer. Instead, they offered something simple, a chance to talk. They suggested a meeting, one-on-one, with no weapons, no armies, just the leaders of both races sitting down together. It was a proposal that seemed too simple, too naive to work. But desperate times led to desperate measures. The Zorath and Mirian leaders, tired of the war, agreed to meet. They weren't sure what the humans had planned, but they were willing to hear them out. The meeting took place on a neutral moon, far from the battlefields, and the humans arrived without fanfare, just a small group of diplomats and advisors. The two sides, armed with their distrust and hatred, met in a cold, silent room. The human ambassador, a calm and quiet woman named Elora, stood at the front of the room. She didn't have the imposing presence of a general or a fleet commander. She had no weapons, no threats. Just words. "We're not here to force peace," she began, her voice clear and steady. "We're here to show you something you've forgotten: each other. We're here to remind you that you're not just enemies, but people." The leaders of the Zorath and Mirians exchanged confused glances. What was she talking about? Elora continued. "You've been fighting for so long that you don't see each other as people anymore. You see only enemies. But before the war, you were allies. Before the war, you worked together." What happened? A heavy silence filled the room. The Zorath and Mirian leaders shifted uncomfortably. They had both lost so much, but neither could remember how it all started. What had caused them to begin this war? They were so deep in the battle that they had forgotten everything else. Elora spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "What if you could remember who you really are? What if you could see what you've become and decide if this war is really worth it?" The Zorath leader, Kale, grunted. "We've fought for too long. There's no going back." "But there is," Elora replied. "You've all lost something. Your soldiers, your families. But you still have something else. You have the power to choose the future. What will you do with that power?" For the first time, Kale and the Mirian leader, Lyra, felt a strange shift. It wasn't that they agreed with the human woman. No, it was something deeper. They were tired. They were weary of endless battles, of never-ending destruction. For the first time, they thought about the people who had died in this war not as soldiers or enemies, but as individuals who had been part of their worlds. Alara wasn't asking them to surrender. She wasn't asking them to stop fighting right away. She was asking them to see the truth of their situation, to look beyond the war and understand what they were losing. "What if we showed you something else?" Alara said. "A vision of what your people could be if you stopped fighting." Kyle and Lyra exchanged another look. This wasn't like any peace talks they had ever been part of. The humans weren't here to negotiate terms or take advantage of weakness. They were simply asking for understanding. The humans activated a small device. It was nothing special, just a simple hologram projector. But as the device hummed to life, a vision filled the room. It wasn't a battle scene or a map of troop movements. It was a vision of the future. A future where the Zorath and the Mirians worked together, rebuilt their worlds, and healed the wounds of war. The vision showed families reunited, cities flourishing, and soldiers no longer fighting. For the first time, both leaders saw what they could have, what they had lost. The vision was powerful, but it wasn't forced on them. They felt it. They saw the faces of their people, the future they could create. "What will you choose?" Alara asked again, her voice softer now. "You don't have to keep fighting. You have the power to end it." It was a question that lingered in the air. The leaders didn't speak for a long time. There was so much to consider. The war had been part of their lives for so long, but now they saw it in a new light. They saw what the war had cost them, and they saw what they could have if they chose peace. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kale spoke. "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm. "Let it end." Lyra nodded in agreement. Let it end. And just like that, the war was over. The humans had done what no one thought possible. Not by fighting, not by force, but by showing the leaders of the two sides the simple truth: peace was possible. The galaxy watched in awe as the humans left, their mission complete. The Zorath and the Mirians, once bitter enemies, had chosen to rebuild. The humans didn't fight wars, they ended them. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The war had ravaged the galaxy for centuries. Two powerful factions, the Varnak and the Exalorians, had been locked in endless conflict. Entire civilizations had crumbled, and countless lives were lost. No one remembered when the fighting started, only that it never seemed to end. The war was so deep-rooted no one could imagine peace. But then, something unexpected happened. The humans arrived. Their ships, sleek and silent, entered the battle zone without warning. The Varnak and Exalorians assumed they were just another faction entering the war. They prepared for another confrontation, but when the humans made contact, they didn't offer weapons. They offered words. "We don't fight wars," said the human ambassador, a calm man named Elias. "We end them." The Varnak and Exalorian leaders were baffled. They knew humanity wasn't as advanced as they were. The Varnak had powerful fleets that could crush planets, and the Exalorians had technology capable of controlling minds. Yet, here were the humans, with no army, no weapons, simply offering peace. Peace? One of the Varnak commanders sneered. "You think peace is possible? After all the destruction? We've been at war for centuries. What could you possibly offer?" The human ambassador didn't answer immediately. Instead, he simply motioned for the leaders of both sides to gather in a large, neutral meeting room. They were skeptical, but curiosity got the best of them, and they agreed to meet. Elias spoke again, his voice steady. "We understand you don't believe peace is possible, but it is. Not through force, but through understanding. We know the truth behind this war. And it's not what you think." The Varnak and Exalorian leaders exchanged confused looks. How could anyone know the truth behind their war? It was so long and so complicated. They had fought for power, for resources, for dominance. It felt like the war was their reason for existing. What truth? One of the Accelerian generals asked. Elias took a deep breath before revealing something that shocked them all. You were manipulated. Both of you. By a third party. A shadow group that has been controlling the war from behind the scenes. The room went silent. No one knew how to react. The thought was unimaginable. How could they have been manipulated for so long without realizing it? You're lying, a Varnic leader spat. We've fought for power, for honor. There's no one else pulling the strings. Elias shook his head. That's exactly what they want you to believe. This war was never about power. It was about control. A group known as the Dominion has been feeding both sides false information, encouraging the war, making sure you never find peace. Their goal isn't victory, it's chaos. The room filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. The leaders had spent so many years fighting, and now they were being told that their enemy was not even the true enemy? The very idea seemed impossible. They had been led to believe that their battles were for survival, for the future of their people. The truth felt like a slap in the face. How can we trust you? One of the Accelerian commanders demanded. You're just humans. What proof do you have? Elias calmly activated a small device, and the room darkened. Images began to play on the walls, showing scenes of the Dominion's interference in the war. The Dominion agents, hidden in the shadows, manipulating information, sabotaging peace talks, inciting hatred between the Varnac and Accelorians. It was all there, undeniable and clear. This is the truth, Elias said quietly. For centuries, the Dominion has been using you as pawns. They've kept you at war so they could profit from the chaos. They've sold weapons to both sides, fed false rumors, and ensured that no peace could ever be reached. The leaders watched the footage in stunned silence. It was all true. They had been fighting a war that had no real reason, no real enemy, just the puppet masters pulling their strings. But how do we stop them? A Varnac leader finally asked, his voice laced with frustration. We've been at war for so long. We don't know how to live without it. Elias didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air. The idea of peace seemed almost impossible after so many years of fighting. But then he spoke, his voice firm. You stop by choosing something different. You stop by putting an end to the cycle of hatred. You stop by recognizing that this war was never yours to begin with. There was a long pause. The Varnac and Accelorian leaders looked at each other. For the first time in years, they didn't see enemies, they saw people who had been caught in the same trap. The Dominion had fueled their hatred, but the choice to continue had always been theirs. We can stop the war, one of the Accelorian leaders said quietly. But how do we stop them? Elias smiled softly. By revealing the truth. By showing your people what has been done to them. The Dominion thrives in the shadows. But they can't survive in the light. It wasn't easy. It would take time. The Dominion had their claws deep in both factions, and convincing the people to believe the truth was no simple task. But it was a start. The leaders of the Varnac and Accelorians agreed to stop fighting. They began to spread the truth to their people, showing them the manipulation they had suffered. It wasn't easy. Some resisted, some fought against the idea of peace. But more and more began to see the truth. The Dominion wasn't invincible. They relied on chaos, on division. And now that the truth was out, their power began to crumble. The war between the Varnac and Accelorians ended, not with a battle, but with the realization that they had been lied to for so long. They had fought for nothing but the lies of a hidden enemy. And so, the humans left, their mission complete. They hadn't won the war. They hadn't destroyed anything. They had done something far more powerful. They had revealed the truth that peace wasn't impossible. It was just hidden behind a lie. The war had raged for centuries, its origins long forgotten. The Thalawar and the Cordons had fought in a cycle of endless bloodshed. Entire star systems had fallen, planets reduced to rubble, and the people of both factions were worn, weary, and desperate for an end. But every attempt at peace had failed, swallowed by distrust and anger. The two factions had reached the brink of annihilation, with only one option left, One final battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Both sides prepared for it. Ships lined the edges of their territories, soldiers armed to the teeth, waiting for the call to fight. But then, the humans arrived. Their ships entered the galaxy without warning, bypassing the heavily guarded zones. They were small in number compared to the two warring factions, but their presence was enough to disrupt the tense standoff. The Thalar and Corridans assumed the humans had come to aid one side, but the humans sent a message that shocked them all. We don't fight wars. We end them. The Thalar and Corridans dismissed the message at first. What could humans, with their primitive technology and small fleets, possibly know about ending a war? The two factions had been fighting for so long that peace seemed out of reach, an impossible dream. But the humans had something they didn't expect. The message continued, "We offer you a choice. One final decision. The fate of your people depends on what you choose. No more fighting. Only peace or destruction." Both factions debated for days, their leaders unsure of how to proceed. Some wanted to destroy the humans for interfering. Others wanted to hear them out, but one thing was clear, they could not keep fighting. Too much had already been lost. The humans arranged a meeting, bringing the leaders of both factions to a neutral space station on the edge of the galaxy. It was a place where no weapons were allowed, and no alliances could be made. Only words. The leaders arrived with their advisors, unsure of what to expect. They were greeted by a human ambassador, a woman named Lyra. She stood tall and calm, a presence of peace in a room filled with tension. "Why are you here?" a Thalar general asked, his voice harsh. "We have been fighting for centuries. You think you can just come and end it all?" Lyra met his gaze. "I think you can end it. Not me, not us." You, the Corridan leader, a tall figure named Zarek, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "We have come to this point because we have no choice. There's nothing left to save." Lyra's voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. "There is always a choice." She explained her proposal. The humans had developed a device, one that would reveal the true cost of their war, not just in terms of lives lost, but in the long-term effects on their species, their future, their very identity. The device would show them the destruction they had caused and would continue to cause if the war did not end. "You've fought for so long, but you've never seen the full picture," she said. "This device will show you the truth." Zarek and the Thalar general exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know what to think. The idea of seeing the consequences of their actions, of actually experiencing the pain and suffering they had caused, was terrifying. But it also sparked something within them, a small seed of doubt. Lyra activated the device, and for the first time in their lives, the leaders of the Thalar and Corridan saw their war from a new perspective. They saw the destruction not just of cities and ships, but of entire ways of life. They saw the faces of children, their homes destroyed, their families broken. They saw the soldiers they had sent to fight, men and women who had no real reason to kill, but did so because they had been told to. The device didn't force the leaders to feel anything. It simply showed them the consequences of their actions, the pain, the suffering, the irreversible damage. And for the first time, both leaders began to understand what they had truly done. The war was not a matter of survival or honor. It was a cycle of destruction that would eventually leave nothing but ashes. "I didn't realize," Zarek whispered, his voice strained. The Thalar general stood motionless, his eyes locked on the images. "How do we fix this?" "How do we stop?" Lyra nodded. "The first step is recognizing the truth. The second is making a choice." The choice was simple. The humans had offered peace. They had given them the truth. Now, the leaders had to decide, continue the war and destroy everything, or take the difficult path of peace and rebuild what had been lost. The room was filled with silence. Time seemed to slow as the leaders thought. The weight of the decision pressed down on them. Both factions had suffered immensely. Peace felt impossible after so many years of hatred. Yet, the images they had seen haunted them. The destruction they had caused, the future they had all but erased, was undeniable. Zarek was the first to speak. "What do we have left to fight for?" We've already lost everything. The Thalar general looked down, his hand trembling as he thought. For the first time, he saw his people through a different lens, not as warriors, but as individuals who had been trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence. His people, like the Corridans, were tired. And they knew it. "I agree," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's over." Lyra smiled softly. "Then you've made the right choice." The leaders stood together and made the decision to end the war. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew that continuing the fight would only bring more destruction. They would rebuild together and create a future based on cooperation instead of conflict. But there was one last choice they had to make, the final one. Lyra offered them a chance to destroy all the weapons they had accumulated over the years. The Thalar and Corridans had weapons capable of wiping out entire planets, and those weapons would have to be destroyed. If peace was to survive, it was a choice that weighed heavily on them. Destroying the weapons meant losing their ability to defend themselves. But it was also the only way to truly commit to peace. After a long, tense moment, both leaders nodded. "We destroy them," Sarek said. And so, the war came to an end not with a battle, but with the final, difficult choice to trust in peace. The Thalar and Corridans laid down their arms, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy began to heal. Lyra and the humans watched as the two factions took the first steps toward rebuilding. The final choice had been made, and though the road ahead would be difficult, it was one they would walk together.